Welcome to another edition of Business 7, the program where we look in depth at some of the issues on the economic and financial landscape of Namibia. In today's program, we have an interview with a Cirrus Capital analyst, Jaco Schoombie, and he's going to look at the MTC listing, which is expected to happen in November, and specifically, he's going to focus on what shareholders might be able to expect in terms of growth and dividends. Later in the program, we have an insert where a Simonis Storm economist and a managing director, that is Theo Klein and Bruce Hansen, talk to Dr. Edward Turner. Now, he is the head of Nedbank Namibia's corporate and investment banking, and they recently had a panel discussion, the clip in which we will bring you later on. They look specifically at the social and political stability in Namibia and how that benefits or don't benefit the country. Also, Dr. Turner will be talking about the impact of COVID-19 on the banking industry. Of course, there are much more stories in today's printed edition of Business 7, which you can find in Republikein, Allgemeine Zeitung, and Namibian Sun. It includes a look at fuel prices and what Namibia can expect of that in the future. And also we have an infographic breaking down the cost of COVID-19 from the data we have thus far. Now, unfamiliar face in the Biz 7 studio, Jaco Schoombie from Cirrus Capital. Hello, Jaco, and welcome.
Good morning, Jo Marie. Thanks for having me.
Jaco, we're talking about MTC. Now, Cirrus has done a very comprehensive analysis of MTC's initial public offering or the IPO. But before we start looking at the company itself, there is tremendous hype around the listing of the first SOE in Namibia. And while it's a great step because government has been talking about it for years, so it is a landmark occasion in that respect, there are very specific reasons why government has now pushed the listing of MTC. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think they need the money to fund the large deficit. I think they have a net funding requirement of 30 billion this year, and although they want to fund it the majority of it through government debt or bonds, unfortunately they won't be able to raise that quantum that they need this year just by doing that. And the listing of MTC now will obviously help. They'll get around 1.5 billion will go to the Ministry of Finance from the listing, which will help fund that deficit. And also, one should also remember that MTC is one of the better run SOEs as well. It's profitable. It's been paying dividends on a consistent basis to the government, who's for the last few years is a 100% shareholder of MTC. So yeah, it's a good business to list. It's one also that you'll get interest in from other parties. So I think it's a good step, yes.
And Jaco, talking about dividends, MTC has a very attractive scenario when it comes to dividend payouts, which of course would be very important for government. How do you feel about their projections on dividends?
So they want to pay out, or they're committing to paying out at least 70% of profit after tax. Now, that is obviously, I think the main reason for that is that the government will still be the majority shareholder, will needs the cash on an annual basis or semi-annual basis. I think they'll pay semi-annual dividends. But that also hampers the outlook going forward. I mean, if you want to grow the business, you want to retain a bit more earnings and not pay out everything. But still, how we value MTC, and it's mainly as a result of having this large payout, is on a dividend discount model. So yeah, from a dividend perspective, MTC looks attractive, and one can also understand that the government needs the cash, and that's why they have this high payout ratio.
It's a blue chip company, and obviously everybody from institutional to retailers would find it a very attractive option. Once the company is listed, though, what do you expect in terms of the company's performance going forward?
I think that's a difficult thing. It's like asking me what the rand is going to do against the US dollars over the next few years. One must remember the quantum of this listing. It's the largest listing in the NSX's history, and that, in our view, that will take out a lot of the demand for the share. I think most people that want the share will probably get it through listing from a retail and institutional perspective. Obviously, one sort of X factor that we're not sure of, and one we'll only probably get once the listing has occurred or once more information is how the offshore or international investors, if they are also interested in it. So saying no, it's going down or it's going up is difficult. But we'll have to see. Like it's a very well-run company. They've got a large market share. They're probably the strongest or one of the strongest brands in Namibia. I mean, probably everyone in Namibia is a MTC customer either now or in future. So yeah, it's a good company from that perspective. Although there's some questions on some aspects of it, but I mean, it remains a good company, and it should remain the dominant voice player in Namibia as well.
You touched on market share. In terms of market share, the fact that they own so much of the market, doesn't that hamper their growth opportunities?
Yes, I think that's one of the points that we made in our report that we released earlier this week, is that it's difficult, even when you have 90% market share, it's difficult to grow market share. And although MTC has been losing a bit of market share, it doesn't really dampen the revenue prospects for the company. Although the question now is where the growth will come from. I mean, growing from a revenue base of 2.7 billion Namibian dollars, it's difficult to grow from such a dominant position. But then on the flip side, also having that dominant position makes it a bit more difficult for other players to come in and take it away from you. But obviously, when you're looking at investing, you want to know that there's going to be earnings growth, and that's just one of the aspects where we feel that we think earnings will probably stay stable over the next few years. But we're struggling to find what the catalyst for significant earnings growth is going to be over the next few years, although the company is in this dominant position. Yeah.
Besides the size of the market share, what other challenges do you foresee awaits MTC in terms of growth?
Yeah, I think, yeah, like I mentioned in the sort of at the previous question, the high market share, and obviously the economic environment in Namibia also makes it difficult. I think the ICT sector is a lot more competitive now as well. I think the likes of CRAN and the Competition Commission as well, they want to make it a fair operating environment. And I think that might that might make it difficult for the likes of a MTC or a Telecom Namibia to stay in the dominant positions that they are.
They've mentioned in their report some of the areas that they will focus on. One of these is mobile money. How do you feel about that?
I mean, that's a buzzword on the African continent. If you look at the listings and all of the companies, if they mention fintech or mobile money or any of the likes, the offshore and mainly US-based investors like that a lot, and they'll pay crazy amounts of money for it, even though the majority of your mobile money platforms are probably not profitable. But so we did the sort of comparison with M-Pesa, who's the sort of market leader on the African continent. Although their uptake was great, and they probably the largest financial sort of institution in West Africa, if I'm not mistaken. But the difference from Namibia and other parts of the world, and especially Africa, is that we already have around 80% of our population with access to a bank account or some sort of bank account in one way or another. And we feel that might make it difficult for MTC to sign up and make this a large part of revenue. Now, they want to target around 15 to 20% of revenue that will be made up of mobile money services within the next 5 years. Yeah, I don't think it's impossible, but I just think we have a good banking system. We have a lot of people with access to that banking system. The banks already have mobile money apps. We have other sort of mobile money apps as well in Namibia. So I think one thing that you shouldn't discount is the market reach of MTC. I mean, as I mentioned, most people in Namibia already either have the MTC app or use MTC on a weekly basis to recharge our web products or something like that. So if they pull it off, it can be a nice shot in the arm for them, but I'm not as sure as they are of that.
Jaco, thank you very, very much for your insights. This, of course, is a developing story, and no doubt we will rely on your expertise in the foreseeable future again. Thank you very much and have a nice day.
No problem. Thank you.
Eddie, I just need to ask you a question on you are from the banking sector, and I need to understand the COVID crisis that we had and that we still currently in. How is that different from other crises that we've seen? Have you seen any kind of similarities? And I would like you to speak maybe from a you're dealing with corporate clients, speaking from a corporate client point of view. What have you seen, the reaction from their side?
Let me first talk to the similarities. I think with all such crises, there is uncertainty because we don't know what the future will hold. In the normal environment, we would say we can't project for more than 12 months or so, but last year it was harsher. So we couldn't even project a month further. But the similarity is the uncertainty. And related to that, the fear. And with fear, you see the lack of forward planning, the lack of investment, because you don't know what your returns will be on such investments, whether it will be a loss. So we see a lot of businesses, and this time, just focusing on achieving break even, planning into the next financial year. There are some of the corporates with big reserves prior to COVID last March, and for them it was obviously much easier. Mm-hmm. And so the lesson that we see in that is that one need to be prepared, and it is not always possible to prepare. And The other thing, and I think that for me is the most important thing that is a similarity between other crises and this, is that you see people becoming creative in a good way. So businesses finding ways of cutting costs without having a very negative impact on the business and the employees. Also seeing ways in which they can generate different channels of revenue from different sources. And yeah, human beings are creative in that sense. And I think I can use a few examples. And so to conclude, I think a lot of people's eyes were opened quicker to look at other opportunities to make their businesses grow in terms of export, in terms of finding other markets, in terms of product diversification, in terms of not continuing with something which is not productive or profitable.
Okay. All right. No, thanks, Eddie. I think it's important that we understand, what's happening in the real economy, because as much as I like Theo, Theo is an economist. I don't know if Theo knows what's happening in the real. No, I'm just making. No, I think it's important that we understand what is, what the real issues are. So Theo, just to come back to, you've made a couple of strong statements, and I think on one of the slides you've also compared Namibia. I think you compared Namibia to Venezuela and some of the other places in terms of, was it political stability and violence?
Yeah, absolutely.
I found it quite interesting that you would compare Namibia to some of those countries. Was there a specific reason for that?
Maybe a lack of data for some countries that I would have wanted to compare Namibia to, but also choosing countries that I know would put Namibia in a better light. So not really specific reason for that.
I'm asking that question because if I look at Namibia, and we're talking about political stability and social stability, very important factors that you have to have for economic growth to take place. But we've been having political stability and we've been having social stability, and yet we still find ourselves at the place where we're at. So is this something where we say we sacrifice all the other things so that we can have political and social stability? I'm just wondering, is it something that we comfort ourselves and say, that's still okay, so don't worry about the other things? I don't know if you have any specific comments on that.
Yeah, look, I think it is at times frustrating that we as a nation don't, we just complain amongst each other. You go to a braai and you complain, you point out all the problems, and then you go home. You haven't solved anything. And that is so typical in our society that we just complain. We complain to the wrong people. So I think there is a lot of passiveness that I see in our society, or we as a Namibian nation. And as you say, Bruce, it is a good thing to have, but then it comes at the cost of not changing and bringing about reform in other things that are also very important. So once again, I'm not a sociologist, but I would say that at some point we quite frankly need to stand up and say things cannot go on the way they have been going on for the last 6 years more or less, when our economy started contracting. We have Vision 2030 just around the corner. And how realistic are the targets set out in that document? Are we really going to achieve it? And how will we as a nation look and feel if we don't achieve those targets? So at some point, I think we need to become more or less passive, complain to the right people, put pressure on the right people, and ask the right questions. And bring to light the underlying problems, and instead of trying to walk on eggshells around the problem. If you look at the last, you could probably go to the last 1,000 years. The only way significant change came about was from revolution. Now, I'm not saying Namibians should now go and buy machine guns and steal tanks from our army and go crazy. And drive to Parliament and threaten them. But I just think that at some point And that's why social stability is a concern for me, or social unrest rather, because I just do ask myself almost every night when I put my head on my pillow, to what extent will the most vulnerable of our society, the unemployed, especially our youth, who arguably have lost a great deal of hope for any kind of positive future for themselves, how much longer can they remain quiet, and you know, at what point will their frustration really burst into something radical?
Yeah, because what your graph does show us is that there's unemployment just growing, and you also have your Gini coefficient. That's just it's getting poorer and poorer. So you find that it becomes a problem. And it's not a problem that started yesterday or the year before. It's a problem that has been in the economy for quite a while. And then you find that if people start getting restless because they don't see, because you've painted a bit of a positive future or positive picture, but if the man on the street, if I don't see that future, it becomes very difficult for me to have hope, and then my hope is only in the present. Sorry, Eddie, anything that you wanted to add there?
Yeah. So for me, political stability, if it was such a big factor, we would have seen the fruit of that in the past 30 years because we had political stability. So for me, it isn't a positive factor. For me, it is a standard requirement. What I want to latch on to what Theo said in terms of revolution is, for me, the word that came out while Nikki was talking is we need a big rethink of where we are, where we want to be, and what we need to get there. And that need to happen not only in a government perspective, but also from the private sector and also collaboratively. Because, yeah, you spoke about 1,000 years. But the future is also a long time. So with all the moving parts in the world and the fact that we are succumbing to impact of inflation and interest rates globally, we still need to have our own internal plan. So let me use the analogy. I'm still training for the Desert Dash this year, although I know I will not win. I'm still competing against myself. But if I don't become better, why am I doing it? And I think that is the mindset and that more people need to have. And that for me is the hope that we can put into this country, with all the benefits, all the positives that we have.
Thank you for joining us. We will be seeing you in 2 weeks' time. Until then, stay safe.